Tim, you're upside down. Okay, so we got the when. When was it? 1930s. Where did this happen?
Alabama.
Alabama, small southern town. And Macomb County is the specific place in Alabama.
If it's a town, why is it called county?
That's just what they call, it's not a real, I guess, town. It's just the way they called it Macomb County. I don't know why. So why is this setting important?
Cotton.
Okay. What's happening during this time period?
Slavery.
Okay, not necessarily slavery, but still racial discrimination. What else is happening?
The Civil Rights Movement.
Good. Well, the civil rights big movement was in the 60s, but there's still civil rights happening during this time. Lots of discrimination. The 20s was the 29 was a stock market crash, so people were poor. So some of these things help to set the mood of the story and the action of the story. Whenever the author describes something, like if a story is set in a stormy night or a dark and deserted house, it sets the mood of the story as an eerie and creepy mood. If it's set in the future, we see advanced technology, things like that. So the setting is important to the story. So we discussed Macomb County, Alabama in the 1930s. And if you want to take a few notes on the town, just as the description of the town, a tired old town is what they called it in the southern United States during the Great Depression. And we said this was significant because it sets the tone for the story and what's going to happen in the story. Atticus is a lawyer, so he has the responsibility to protect the innocent. And in the story, the big event of the story is his the court case with the black man that's accused of raping. And so he has to defend that black man in a county where everyone just assumes black people are guilty rather than innocent. So this small town is full of gossip. People are set in their own ways. So you'll see that in many of the characters who gossip and talk about each other. The racial tensions, because it's in the southern part of the United States, it's a rural type of setting. And we know that the southern part of the United States is the part that had a lot of racial tension. And then we know because it's during the Great Depression, there's nowhere to go, nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with. That was on the video that we watched. Nothing to see. Very poor communities. They were made up of farmers mostly. And no one had money to pay for a lawyer or a doctor or things like that. They were lucky to have food. Okay, the narrative perspective is the view through which the story is communicated. And Rebecca was asking me who was talking. And Scout is the speaker, the narrator in the story. And she's speaking as a first-person narrator. If she were speaking as an omniscient narrator, we would know more of what all the characters are thinking. But because it's from a first-person narrator, we only know her perspective. And that is different from story to story based on what perspective is being told. So if you think about it, how would the story of Cinderella differ if it were told from a different perspective? Think of the story of Cinderella.
If it were told from her stepmother's perspective, Cinderella would be the bad person.
Okay. We wouldn't have as much sympathy for Cinderella, would we? Okay. So the perspective changes the way we look at the story. If it were from one of the ugly stepsisters or the stepmother, yes, it would be totally different. Or from the prince or the fairy godmother. So the narrative perspective in To Kill a Mockingbird is first-person narrator, Scout as an adult. So think of her as she's an adult looking back on her childhood. And that's her perspective as an adult, what she felt as a child. So why is this significant? Because it's very personal. It's a childlike innocence. You get insight into how Scout feels and her thoughts. And you can hear her voice come through. You can get to know her personally as a character. And we learn right along with the narrator. We don't have an omniscient point of view, so we only know the story as she relays the story. We can't see beyond what she's telling us at the time. Keeps us in the dark, so to speak. Plot structure, that's how the novel is put together, or any movie or work. And how they link together. So here are, remember from last year when we studied story elements and plot, we studied exposition, which was the beginning. Chapter 1 is the exposition. So remember that chapter 1 is probably the hardest part of the story because you're just getting the background information. You're getting to know the people, the characters, the setting. And so the rising action doesn't come right at the beginning. So you have to wait a little bit until you get into the actual action of the story. And then you hit the climax of the story, which would come in the trial and what happens in the outcome of the trial. And then all the falling action comes and puts everything together and you get a resolution or an ending to your story. So, in To Kill a Mockingbird, we get to be introduced to the county. We meet Dill. Remember Dill? Anybody remember who Dill is?
A little boy in the field, right?
Yeah.
The neighbor's like nephew or something.
Yeah, it's he goes to stay with his aunt during the summer, and so Dill is the little boy that they play with. Scout and Jem play with him. The rising action starts when Scout goes to school. The children are starting to grow up, and it leads up to the main event of the story, which is the trial. And the trial of Tom, the verdict, all of that comes together in the story. Revenge happens, and we get the ending. Those are all of those literary elements that we learned last year. The protagonist, the central character, the antagonist, who's the opposition, the central characters, the minor characters, the dynamic ones. Dynamic, remember, change. So we think about characters who change over time. Atticus is a character that is static. Atticus will never change his values and his morals. And then round characters are the ones that are very complex that we know a lot about. And then the flat characters are just fill-in type of characters that we just see as background characters. Themes that reoccur in a story. In To Kill a Mockingbird, we can see a lot of themes: prejudice, social class, courage and bravery, education, innocence, growing up, law, justice. All of these are ideas and themes that the author wants to convey as a message to the reader. Suspense. In To Kill a Mockingbird, we hear a lot about Boo Radley before we ever meet him. Boo will come into the picture very early on in the story, but we don't know who he is, and it keeps him in suspense all the way through the story. We don't know what the outcome of the trial will be, and we're unsure how Scout will mature. Some foreshadowing that takes place. The boy that goes to school that's a bully, and that kind of foreshadows who his father is because he takes after his father. The father is also a bully. Many of the episodes that happen are foreshadowing to other events in the story. Okay. So, any questions about the story so far? All right, I'm going to help you out with question number 1 of your review questions. Question number 1 is to identify the different characters. So I'm going to put those up on the screen and let you maybe take some notes so you can write those down. Come on now. Okay. Can you guys read this?
Yeah.
So it says to identify these. So Atticus is the lawyer, Scout and Jem's father. Okay, I'll just let you go through and maybe take a few notes on those different characters, and then you'll have question number 1 done. Okay, I underlined the characters so you can see them a little better.
So if we print off the study guide question sheet, you just want to start the answers on separate pieces of paper?
Yeah,
Or are we like typing them out? And
you don't have to submit them to me, but you won't be able to do well on the quiz if you don't answer the questions. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
This is basically your study guide for your quiz. And if you know the stuff on the study guide, you will be able to do fine on the quiz. So you just want to write them out for your study purposes. Are some of you still working?
I just finished.
Yes.
Are we all done?
Yeah.
Okay, so Tuesday, have first 3 chapters read and then be prepared to take a quiz on the first 3 chapters. And like I said, if you fill out that study guide as you're reading, you should have no problem on the quiz. Any questions?
I don't think so.
I think so. Okay, well, have a good weekend and the rest of your day.
You
Thanks.
too.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.